My own mother betrayed me. Now she begs for my forgiveness. I was born into a home where love was always measured by favor and obedience. And I learned early on that I would never be the center of my mother's universe. Every morning, I watched her greet my younger brother with a smile that warmed the entire room, while her eyes barely met mine before drifting away. As a little boy, I clung to the hope that someday I would earn her affection and fill the emptiness that I felt, even though deep down I suspected that my worth was forever diminished by comparison. I remember how my mother would fuss over every little thing my brother did, from the way he dressed to the way he spoke, while my own achievements went unnoticed and uncelebrated. In our modest home, the small blessings that were meant to nurture a child's soul were selectively given, leaving me to wonder if I was even worthy of a single kind word. I tried to be helpful and loving, hoping that the sacrifice of my own desires would eventually bring me the care I craved, but nothing ever changed. Even as I grew older and began to understand the dynamics of our relationship, I could never shake the bitter reality that I was seen as an afterthought, a constant reminder of what my mother never truly wanted. School was the only escape from the daily reminder of my inadequacy. Yet even there, I felt isolated by the painful comparisons that came naturally in my family. Every birthday, every school achievement, and every little success was celebrated for my brother with such exuberance that I often felt invisible in my own life. I would sit quietly in class, hoping that someday my efforts would be recognized and that I could finally claim a fraction of the love that was so freely given to him. My teachers, kind though they were, could only do so much, and I longed for a parent's praise, a warm hug, a gentle word of encouragement that I was somehow different from the rest. When I brought home report cards adorned with bright stickers and proud remarks for my brother, I would study my own with trembling hands, trying to decipher if there was any trace of pride in my mother's voice when she mentioned my name. Even during family gatherings, the contrast was painfully apparent as my brother's laughter filled the room while my own voice was reduced to a murmur, swallowed by the cacophony of others' joy. I began to internalize the belief that I was never meant to be cherished, that I was destined to remain in the shadows of a family that prized perfection over sincerity. As I entered my teenage years, the wounds inflicted by my mother's neglect festered into a quiet determination to prove myself, even if it meant forging a path entirely on my own. I dedicated every spare moment to my studies, vowing to rise above the mediocrity that had been thrust upon me, and I poured my heart into extracurricular activities, hoping that success might one day erase the sting of rejection. While my peers enjoyed the comforts of family support, I learned to rely solely on my own strength, pushing myself to excel academically and socially despite the ever-present doubt of my own worth. I remember countless nights spent hunched over textbooks, yet fueled by a mix of hope and desperation, wondering if any of my efforts would ever be enough to rewrite the narrative of my life. Even as I began receiving accolades and scholarships, the victories felt hollow without the validation of the one person whose approval I had craved all my life. I often lay awake, wrestling with conflicting emotions, gratitude for the success I was building, and a deep-seated resentment for the family that had so carelessly abandoned me. In those quiet moments, the promise of a better future became my only solace, and I resolved to one day step out from behind the shadows of my past and claim the life that I deserved. At the age of 18, when the rest of my peers celebrated their newfound independence, I finally made the decision to leave home. I packed a small bag with the few possessions I had managed to collect over the years and boarded a bus with nothing but the hope of a fresh start in a city where no one knew my name. The journey was both terrifying and exhilarating, a bittersweet escape from a past filled with constant reminders of my inadequacy. In that new city, I found solace in the anonymity of a bustling metropolis, where every face was a story and every street corner promised the chance for reinvention. I enrolled in college on a full scholarship, determined to prove that I could succeed without the crutch of a broken family, and I immersed myself in my studies, leaving little room for the painful memories of home. My new life was filled with challenges, yet every hurdle I overcame became a silent testament to my resilience and an unspoken declaration that I was more than the sum of my past. With each small victory, I felt the shackles of my old life slowly crumble, replaced by the thrilling promise of what I could achieve on my own. College was a time of both discovery and solitude, and I threw myself into my work with a single-minded focus that bordered on obsession. I joined clubs, made friends, and even found a part-time job that helped me cover my expenses, but at the back of my mind, the wounds of my childhood still etched with every smile I saw between others and every careless word I overheard. In lectures and late-night study sessions, I reminded myself that every moment of hardship was paving the way for a future that I would claim as my own. The academic challenges were many, but they were also exhilarating. Each exam passed and every project completed was another brick in the fortress of my independence. I built relationships with mentors and peers who believed in my potential, and slowly I began to see a version of myself that was capable, strong, and deserving of success. Though I never sought out the approval of my estranged family, there were times when I would wonder if my mother had finally come to realize what she had lost. But those thoughts were fleeting, and I soon refocused on the future, a future that I was determined to mold with my own hands. As the years passed, I not only excelled academically, but also began to dream of a career that allowed me to redefine success on my own terms. Graduation day came like a beacon of hope, a moment when I could finally put behind the painful chapters of my past and step into the bright promise of tomorrow. The ceremony was filled with the usual pomp and circumstance, but as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I felt a surge of pride and liberation that I had never known before. I was no longer the forgotten child. I had become a man who had overcome the deepest betrayals and the harshest neglect. With my diploma in hand and a head full of dreams, I vowed to build a life that was a testament to my hard work and determination. I stepped out into the world with a quiet confidence, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was capable of conquering them. The memories of my mother's dismissive words and my brother's entitled behavior were still there, like dark clouds on the horizon. But they no longer held the power to define me. Instead, they became the fuel that drove me to achieve greatness. And I carried that fire with me as I embarked on my professional journey. The real test of my resolve began when I entered the world of business, a realm where competition was fierce and success was hard-won. I had spent years studying business, theory, and honing my skills, and now I was ready to put everything I had learned into practice. I started from scratch, launching a small tech startup with nothing but a borrowed laptop, a few contacts, and an unwavering belief in my own capabilities. The early days were grueling. I worked long hours, often sacrificing sleep and social connections, determined to turn my vision into reality. I encountered countless setbacks, failed pitches, lost clients, and moments when I questioned whether I was truly cut out for this world. But each obstacle only made me more determined to succeed. Slowly, my startup began to gain traction, and I started to see the fruits of my labor materialize in the form of a growing client base and a reputation for innovation. Every success, however small, was a victory over the past, a silent rebuke to the family that had once deemed me unworthy. As I watched my business begin to take off, I felt a sense of vindication that was both sweet and bittersweet, in knowing that I had built something remarkable without ever receiving the love and support that should have been my birthright. Yet, even as I reveled in my professional triumphs, the ghosts of my childhood continued to haunt me in unexpected ways. Late at night, when the world was quiet and my thoughts were my only companions, I would remember the painful words and actions of my mother, her dismissals, her favoritism, and the crushing weight of my insignificance. I had long ago resolved that I would never allow those memories to control me. But some nights they would resurface with a vengeance, steering a mix of anger, sadness, and longing. I often wondered what life would have been like if I had been the child she adored, if I had received the nurturing that so many took for granted. The questions were endless and the answers elusive, and I realized that while I had built a successful life for myself, a part of me still yearned for the unconditional love that had been so cruelly withheld. However, I refused to let that yearning distract me from the future I was determined to create. A future built on hard work, integrity, and the undeniable truth that I was more than the sum of my past. As the years went by, my business grew into a thriving enterprise, and I began to attract the kind of respect and recognition that I had always dreamed of, each milestone a step further away from the painful memories of my childhood. Then, one seemingly ordinary afternoon, my phone rang and I saw a name I had not expected: Mum. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with a mix of apprehension and something I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was a vestige of the longing I had buried so deep inside. I hesitated, and then reluctantly answered the call, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. On the other end of the line, my mother's voice trembled as she said, "Daniel, I need your help." Her words were soft, almost pleading, and they carried the weight of years of regret and unspoken sorrow. She explained, haltingly at first, that my brother had once again spiraled out of control, that his reckless behavior had brought our family business to the brink of collapse. "He's lost everything," she admitted, her voice cracking with emotion. "We're in deep trouble, Daniel, and I don't know what to do." I listened in silence, feeling a cold detachment settle over me as memories of past betrayals surged to the surface. It was as if the ghosts of my childhood were right there on the other end of the line, demanding that I confront the pain I had long tried to escape. For several minutes, I sat in stunned silence as my mother continued to beg for my help, her words tumbling out in a desperate plea for salvation. I remembered all those years of neglect and favoritism. Every time I had been told that I was a burden. Every birthday I had spent in the shadows while my brother was celebrated. The bitterness that had once fueled my determination now surged into a tidal wave of anger and resentment, leaving me cold and unyielding. "I'm not giving you a cent," I finally said, my voice low and unwavering, echoing the sentiment that had long been etched into my heart. I told her that Ryan would have to face the consequences of his own choices and that I had no intention of bailing him out, just as I had never been there for him when I needed support. Her silence on the other end of the line was deafening, and I could almost hear the finality in her unspoken words, a resignation that told me my decision was irrevocable. I ended the call abruptly, leaving behind a past filled with disappointment and betrayal, and in that moment, I felt an unexpected surge of liberation as the chains of my old life fell away. In the days that followed, the repercussions of that phone call rippled through the remnants of the family I had once known. News began to spread that the business, built on the legacy of my father and later sullied by my brother's reckless mismanagement, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Employees whispered in hushed tones about the impending collapse, and creditors grew increasingly impatient, demanding answers from a leadership that no longer existed. My mother, once so proud and unyielding, found herself reduced to pleading with former allies and desperate for any form of support, her once commanding voice now quivering with fear and regret. I watched from a distance as the life she had tried to maintain crumbled, each day a stark reminder of the choices she had made and the cost of her favoritism. There were moments when I felt a pang of sadness, not for myself, but for the loss of a family that had been so utterly consumed by its own dysfunction. Yet, even in those moments, the satisfaction of knowing that I had risen above it all kept me resolute in my decision, a silent affirmation that I was finally free from the tyranny of my past. Months later, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a prestigious business conference, a testament to the success of the company I had built from nothing. The invitation came with accolades and recognition from industry leaders, a far cry from the life I had once known, and it served as a stark contrast to the crumbling remnants of the family business. As I prepared for the conference, I couldn't help but reflect on the long and painful journey that had brought me here. A journey marked by rejection, relentless struggle, and ultimately, a transformation that proved my worth. I recalled the countless nights of solitary work, the sacrifices made in silence, and the bitter taste of every harsh word that had been uttered in my presence. Each memory fueled my determination, reminding me that I had overcome obstacles that no one else could understand. I rehearsed my speech in front of a mirror, my voice steady and strong as I recounted my experiences, not to evoke pity, but to inspire others to break free from the chains of their own pasts. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as I took the stage, and in that moment, I knew that I had finally reclaimed the power that had once been denied to me. The applause that followed my speech was thunderous, a cathartic release of years of pent-up emotion and unspoken truth. In that moment, as I stood before a sea of faces filled with admiration and hope, I felt a profound sense of vindication. I had not only built a successful business from the ashes of my past, but I had also transformed the pain of rejection into a driving force for achievement. Every tear, every sleepless night, and every harsh word had been a stepping stone on the path to this triumph. I shared my story with raw honesty, detailing the relentless hardships and the bitter betrayals that had once defined me. And I urged the audience never to let the darkness of their past dim the light of their future. As I concluded my speech, the standing ovation was not just a celebration of my success. It was an acknowledgement of the resilience of the human spirit and the power of self-belief. I walked off the stage that day knowing that I had finally silenced the ghosts of my past and embraced the person I was meant to become. Then, one quiet evening as I sat alone in the office of my flourishing company, I received an unexpected visitor, a knock at the door that sent a shiver down my spine and stirred memories I had long tried to forget. I opened the door to find my mother standing there, her once proud posture diminished by years of regret and sorrow. Her eyes, red and swollen from tears, met mine with a vulnerability I had never seen before, and in that moment, I realized that the woman who had once cast me aside was now utterly broken by the weight of her own choices. She stumbled into the office, barely able to utter the words, "Daniel, please I need to talk. For a long while, I stood frozen, grappling with a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, pity, and a lingering, uncertain compassion. Her presence was a painful reminder of the childhood I had escaped, yet it also symbolized a final, desperate attempt at reconciliation that I was not sure I could ever accept. I motioned for her to sit, my voice measured and distant as I finally spoke. "Why are you here, Mother? After all these years, why now?" Her answer came in a choked whisper, full of remorse and sorrow, as she admitted that everything had fallen apart. Daniel had ruined every last chance she had, and the family business was nothing but a memory of her past mistakes. As she continued, the raw truth of her confession was laid bare. She had spent years trying to mend what she had shattered, but every attempt had only driven us further apart. In that moment, I realized that the pain she inflicted on me was now her own burden to bear, and though a part of me still ached for the child I once was, I knew that my future could no longer be tied to her regret. We talked for hours in that dimly lit office, our conversation punctuated by long silences and the echo of memories too painful to fully articulate. My mother confessed the depths of her failures, the favoritism, the neglect, and the broken promises that had defined our family life. She told me how she had clung to the hope that Daniel would succeed, that his achievements would somehow redeem her shortcomings, and that in doing so, she had unwittingly sacrificed the love I so desperately needed. I listened, my heart a tumult of emotions, as she broke down, apologizing repeatedly for a lifetime of mistakes. Each word she uttered, though filled with remorse, could not undo the years of hurt that had molded me into the person I had become. I remembered all the lonely nights and the crushing weight of feeling unloved, and in that moment, I realized that forgiveness was not something I could easily offer, nor was it something I truly desired. I thanked her for her honesty, but I made it clear that the past could never be rewritten, that the pain she had caused had forged me into a stronger, more determined man. I told her that while I appreciated her remorse, my life was no longer bound by the chains of our shared history, and that my focus was on the future, one that I had built from my own blood, sweat, and tears. Over the following weeks, my mother visited occasionally, each time with the same tearful apologies and desperate pleas for reconciliation. I maintained a careful distance, never allowing her presence to disrupt the life I had so painstakingly constructed. I was cautious in my interactions, aware that true healing would require more than just regret. It would demand accountability and change that I was not sure she could ever provide. I often walked through the corridors of my office, reflecting on the long journey that had brought me here. From a neglected child to a successful entrepreneur who had reclaimed his power. Each step was a reminder that the only person who could validate my worth was myself, and that the scars of my past were the very source of my strength. I continued to pour my energy into my work, knowing that every achievement was a defiant act of self-love in the face of a lifetime of rejection. And as my company continued to flourish, I found solace in the knowledge that I had finally become the man I was always meant to be. Independent, successful, and unburdened by the ghosts of a painful childhood. One crisp autumn day, as the leaves turned a brilliant shade of gold and the air carried a hint of promise, I received news that shook me to the core. Daniel, the brother my mother had cherished above all else, had fallen into deep trouble once again. His reckless behavior had spiraled out of control, and the financial ruin that had once again beset our family business was now threatening the very livelihood of everyone involved. In a desperate move, my mother reached out to business partners and creditors, scrambling to salvage what little remained of the empire she had once taken for granted. The media picked up on the story, and soon headlines spoke of the collapse of the family legacy, a story of betrayal, favoritism, and the inevitable downfall of those who refuse to face the consequences of their actions. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, my heart hardened by years of isolation and pain, knowing that I had been spared the ruin that now consumed them. In that moment, I realized that the cycle of neglect and favoritism had finally come full circle, and that the very mistakes that had haunted my childhood were now exacting their bitter toll on the ones who had once rejected me. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow, for while justice had been served in its own relentless way, the loss was undeniable and irreversible. As the dust settled on the shattered remnants of our family business, I made a final decision that would sever the ties to a past that had long defined my existence. I arranged a meeting with the remaining creditors and business partners, and with the calm assurance of someone who had weathered countless storms, I took charge of the dissolution of the company. I made it abundantly clear that I was no longer willing to be dragged back into the destructive dynamics of a family that had forsaken me. With every signature, with every final handshake, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a symbolic end to the era of neglect, betrayal, and bitter favoritism. I was now the master of my own destiny, unencumbered by the mistakes of the past, and resolute in my commitment to forge a future built entirely on my own merits. I stood outside the old headquarters for one last time, watching as the building that had once represented so many painful memories was prepared for demolition, and I knew that a new chapter of my life was about to begin. In the years that followed, I dedicated myself fully to my own success, pouring every ounce of passion and determination into the business I had built from nothing. I traveled the world, attended conferences, and forged partnerships that propelled my company into new realms of innovation and prosperity. I became a sought-after speaker, sharing my story with audiences who found inspiration in the fact that one could rise from the ashes of neglect and emerge triumphant. Every accolade, every award, every whispered word of admiration from colleagues and competitors alike was a resounding testament to the truth that I was more than the sum of my past wounds. I built a legacy that was defined not by the bitterness of betrayal, but by the strength that had allowed me to overcome it. And as I looked back on the long, arduous journey from a child abandoned by his mother's love to a man who had reclaimed his power and rewritten his destiny, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the hardships themselves, but for the resilience they had instilled in me. I had turned my pain into purpose, and my scars were now badges of honor that told the story of a life lived boldly and unashamedly. Today, as I sit in the quiet of my spacious office overlooking a city that now knows my name, I can hardly believe how far I have come. The voice of a little boy who once yearned for a mother's love still lingers in the recesses of my memory, but it no longer controls me. Instead, it serves as a reminder of the trials I have endured and the triumphs I have achieved, each day reaffirming that I am enough on my own. My mother's regrets and apologies have faded into a distant echo, a relic of a past that no longer has power over my future. I have learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting, but rather it means liberating oneself from the chains of old wounds. I choose not to dwell on the bitterness, but to celebrate the victory of having built a life defined by my own success and self-worth. In that quiet space between reflection and ambition, I find solace and strength, knowing that every word, every tear, and every moment of pain has led me to this extraordinary present. And so, with a steady heart and an unwavering resolve, I continue to stride forward into the future, leaving behind the shadow of a mother's neglect and a family's betrayal. I have forged a new path, one illuminated by the light of my own determination and the undeniable truth that I was meant for greatness. The scars of my past are now the very lines that map out the landscape of my success, each one a reminder that I have overcome, that I have prevailed, and that I will never again allow anyone to define my worth. I stand as a living testament to the power of resilience and the transformative strength of self-belief. In the end, I did not need their love, and I did not need their approval. I had everything I needed within myself. As the sun sets over the horizon of a life reborn, I smile at the thought of a future where I am finally free to be me, unburdened, undefeated, and undeniably complete.